Okay, and this is episode 3 of the Bat, Fox, and Flux Tavern. We're continuing our discussion from last time on the 3.5 core classes. We ended with Druid last time, so today we'll be picking up with Fighter. Fighter, I see, was slated to be Flux's opening topic.
Fighter's rather simple. Fighter is your tank or your damage dealer. Sometimes your range damage dealer, but that's... Fighter's just the person who does damage and gets in the middle of the fight and has that job. Fighters don't do spells, they don't do healing, they're not even very good skill monkeys. Their whole job is to pretty much be the center of the battle and excel in that one area, which comes at the cost of all the other areas. They're essentially your tanks and warriors.
That's a very quick summarization of Fighter.
Yeah.
That is true, but at the same time, Fighter, if you get down into it, can open up and be very complex. It is possibly one of the greatest examples in D&D of simple to learn but difficult to master because there's so much more to Fighter than what meets the eye. I'm going to take a look here at the Fighter's progression table real quick. Special, I see bonus feat, nothing, bonus feat, nothing, bonus feat, nothing, bonus feat, nothing, etc., etc., etc. That's all he ever gets is bonus feats. Every other level after second level, so every multiple of 2, second, fourth, sixth, eighth, etc., he gets a bonus feat from a massive, massive list of feats that fighters have access to. And these bonus feats are what make the fighter shine in a way that is unexpected. People underestimate the power of properly chosen feat combinations. We can get into this in more detail when we get to feats, but I believe it should be generally touched upon right now because the fighter relies entirely on feats for how he's built. Fighters get access to special feats that no one else gets that makes their weapons even better. They have higher levels of weapon focus. They have the access to what's called weapon specialization. All of these make their weapons hit more often and hurt more. That means that with their chosen weapon, if you choose your weapon, your specialized weapon, and you pump those feats into it, you will be that much better with that weapon than any other class in the entire game could ever hope to be. Add to the fact that a fighter relies on magic weapons at later levels, and magic weapons naturally hit more, do more damage, plus have whatever weird magical effect your magic weapon has, and you have probably your single greatest frontline damage dealer class. If you choose to use a bow, you'll be kind of on par, I think, with the ranger, who we'll get to a little later in the episode, hopefully if we can actually get to ranger by then. And that's only through the fact that he's going to have more feats for his bow than a ranger does, and the fact that he can specialize in his bow while the ranger, I believe, cannot. Ranger doesn't get weapon specialization. Only fighters get weapon specialization. So the ranger's going to get magic, as we'll get into. But fighters' raw bow damage and hit chance is going to be marginally higher. So if you don't have a ranger in your party, having a ranged fighter is actually a viable option if you want to have some non-magic ranged attacks going on. Fighters are also one of the most versatile for creating a character. There is no restriction on race, pretty much, for a fighter. Every race has its fighters. Every walk of life has its fighters, from pit fighters to trained knights. There's just no end to the versatility of creating a character when you've built a fighter. It is probably the best beginner class to pick. If you've never played D&D before and your party is okay with letting you be the fighter, it's probably the best one to learn off of. Because it's simple, it's hard to fuck up unless you're completely inept, and in which case you would have been very bad off no matter what class you picked anyway, due to just ineptness, and that just comes with practice. So don't feel bad if you play a fighter and you're somehow being inept with it. That just means you need to practice with tabletops in general. Fighters are just so well-rounded. And then you look at the Barbarian who we covered last week, and it tries so hard to be the fighter, the light version of the fighter, and it falls so short of being that because the fighter can be just as good a light character as a heavy character. That's all on how you build the fighter. There's really not much else to say about the fighter, really, other than magic gear is your best friend as a fighter. You get to wear a lot of magic gear as a fighter.
That's one thing we should make note. Fighters are great classes, depending on the campaign you're in. If you are in a low magic campaign, or like in a low money giving campaign, fighter's not that great.
No, in a low money
I beg to differ on that because fighters' raw damage value calculations make it the hardest hitting character of all core classes.
I don't believe it gets as many attacks as the monk does, and we'll get to that next. Actually, monk is next, but for now we're still on fighter. And I don't think he scales as fast as a barbarian. Because I think a barbarian peaks quicker.
Yeah, but barbarian may peak quicker,
but he peaks quicker.
but the fighter peaks harder.
Yeah, he peaks harder. He takes longer to climb that mountain, but by God, when he gets on that mountain, he stands tall. So, in a low magic game, I will give this to Flux. In a low magic game, your fighter is going to suffer from lack of magic gear at high level if your DM is a dick. A DM in a low magic game who throws anything at you that requires magic items to defend against or hit is being a dick to you, and your fighter is going to suffer. If it's low magic and the enemies are low magic, you might do okay, but you're going to struggle in those in-between levels between your early game just dominance and your late game peaking. In the middle, where you're trying to climb up that hill, you're going to struggle a bit. You're going to rely a lot on your healer. You're going to rely a lot on whoever your secondary frontliner is to kind of help mitigate some of the damage by taking some of the tanking himself as well. In a low money game, I actually say both Monk and Barbarian do kind of have the fighter beat on low money games, because starting gold is not enough to give a fighter his best possible setup, and if you're not getting a lot of money, that fighter's never going to upgrade his items. Unlike monks and barbarians who can get away with light, cheap armor at the start of the game and coast on that in the sort of game where that's acceptable, the fighter is going to kind of sit there and have nothing really going for him. He's going to feel very bland in a low gold game unless he's being given magic items. If he's being given magic items, he once again takes his seat at the top. So there is a balance to a fighter in the campaign that has to be keenly thought of before you decide, do I want a fighter, monk, or barbarian?
There's one other thing I will say about fighters. One of the problems that I've noticed with fighters, your variety in how you fight, you're going to have like different tactics fighting, but it's all going to essentially be, I do an attack. If you can't handle that as your fighting style, if you want to be like a wizard casting spells, I think that's how kind of 4th edition fighter goes, you don't want to play fighter. Fighter is very bland in fighting. It's not stimulating, really.
Yeah, that is one thing. Fighter can be a very boring class. Fighter relies on fluff or on his importance to the party to be fun. If you're a fighter who's being overshadowed by the rest of the party constantly, and your fluff isn't making it fun to play your character regardless of that, then you're going to have a miserable time of it. And that can happen. A poorly built fighter can be very easily overshadowed because of just the sheer versatility of the fighter can be his own undoing. A fighter can be anything. Ranged, melee, any weapon, doesn't matter. Fighter can do it. There is always a way for fighter to use any weapon you could ever come across. You just have to know how to do it. The problem is that it's his own worst enemy. The more you branch out as a fighter, the worse everything you do slowly starts to get. So while its versatility is a strength, I always recommend this to anyone who plays a fighter. Pick one ranged and one melee, and of those two, pick one to be your primary. Your primary gets all of the feats for specialization and focus, and all of the feats that determine fighting style, things like whirlwind or cleave or far shot. Pick your role. Do you already have someone who can tank for your party, and are you not really needed in the front line? Go ahead and grab a bow and have that bow be your primary. Are you going to be the guy who's always up front, protecting the weak little squishy spellcasters in the back so they don't get murdered and bum rushed? Then grab the heaviest armor you can get, grab either a shield and a one-handed weapon or a two-hander and just go to town, and focus it. But always grab an opposite type of weapon. Even if your focus is ranged, get something small that you can pull out as a melee weapon. Like get a short sword, get a spear, get something quick that you can just drop your bow, pull this out in an emergency. Because even if you focused on range, you're still a bit of a tank. You still have that option of stuff's going to shit, I'm pulling out my melee, I'm dropping my bow, I'm running in and I'm buying time for the squishies to get back and heal, or I'm going to cover the retreat. At the same time, there's going to be instances where you can't get up close if you're a melee fighter. So always have a bow or a crossbow or something handy so that in those events where your brute force can't come to bear with your melee weapon, you can still fall back on your slightly weaker ranged weapon and still contribute to the fight. But don't be one of those guys who has to carry like 12 different weapons around, otherwise you're just going to suck.
But I like being the walking armory.
Well, here's the thing. I've actually looked into this. There's actually no legitimate reason for the walking armory. I perused the monster manual the last few weeks looking for a legitimate claim to the walking armory. Found the number of monsters that are resistant to different types of melee damage, just slashing, bludgeoning, etc., is actually an incredibly small list. And we're talking about a mitigation so small at the levels that they appear that you already have magic weapons that's completely ignoring that mitigation anyway, in some way, shape, or form. In
we'll
which
get
case,
we'll get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that later. In which case, I'm sitting there scratching my head. Why? Because that was always the justification I got for people who built fighters too versatile. Oh, well, I need to have this for skeletons, and this for that, and that for this for that. And I finally, the last couple of weeks, looked at it and I said, no, actually, you don't. There is no legitimate game rules reason to do that. Your benefit to cost ratio is so skewed as a drawback that you may as well have just picked a sword and stuck to the sword, or pick a mace and stuck to the mace. And that's my final thoughts on fighter, really. Have a ranged, have a melee, but never more than one of each, because specialization is key to making you feel unique and useful. And finding new ways to specialize a fighter with different feat combinations is fun to this day. And I've been playing since middle school, about 10 years ago, I'd say it's been now. I've been playing 3.5 now. And I still find new ways to build fighter specializations just through feats alone.
Fighters do not really use magic except for maybe artifacts that they come across if they have the skill set to actually use magic device, which rarely they do. So in a party, they end up relying on magic users for support. On a team,
that's in campaigns with magic.
Yeah. In a general party, fighters might not understand the wizards or share the faith with clerics, but they recognize the value of these other people in their campaigns.
Yeah, because that cleric's going to keep him alive in the fight, and that wizard's giving him the artillery he needs to pummel things from afar before they get close to him. They're already going to be weakened by the wizard before they get anywhere near melee range of that fighter, or even within bow range of that fighter.
So unlike other classes, fighters just see all the other classes as going, you're useful to me. I want you with me because I know my shortcomings and you make up my shortcomings.
Yeah, he's looking at it like your support, your range support, your heal support, your secondary line support, your this support. Everything to a fighter is some form of support, and fighters love support. The more the merrier. Monk. And I wanted to talk about Monk at the start. Monks are a little difficult to play, and by little I mean a lot. I say little mostly because they're little in many ways, not just mechanics. Mechanics, they're hard, but they're also kind of hard in fluff, because on some way, shape, or form, a monk must be lawful, but not necessarily to the law of the land, which is where some people get hung up where they're like, well, how do I be lawful if I don't follow the law? Well, that's where the idea of codes and creeds come in. Monks tend to follow a school of thought as their law, or sort of a personal way of living that they believe will bring them perfection. That's the general given idea of how a monk should operate. Monks are primarily frontline. They wear no armor. In fact, I completely believe they're incapable of wearing armor and still using their monk abilities. Not even light armor, if I recall correctly. And what happens is when they're wearing no armor, to trade off for this, they have an armor class bonus that gives them a bonus to their armor class when they're not wearing any armor. That's in addition to their dexterity bonus they're already getting just because dexterity bonuses work that way. So you want to have high dexterity. They rely primarily on unarmed attacks. There are certain things called monk weapons, which is just this general list of weapons that are considered used by monks. Monk weapons, you can use the monk's primary ability, Flurry of Blows, which gives them extra attacks at a penalty. They can use Flurry of Blows with these monk weapons. Primarily, though, most monks just go bare-fisted and just kick and punch the crap out of everything they come across, or even grapple. I have known monks to just suplex a dragon. So you want a lot of strength. But because you don't wear armor, you're going to get hit every now and then. So you want a lot of constitution. And here's where the flaw in monks begins to surface. Monks' abilities rely on wisdom, so you want a lot of wisdom. Already, we have gone beyond the normal 3 primary stats of every other class. Every class has 3 primary stats: primary, secondary, tertiary. Monks have 4 primary stats because monks also get decent a number of skills that require intelligence or charisma, which means either charisma or intelligence is a good thing to focus on because of your skills. Meaning you have at least anywhere from 4 to 5, possibly all 6 of your abilities needing to be prioritized depending on how you built your character. Monks are very, 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 very hard to do, consequently, in point buy. They're horrid in point buy. And they rely entirely on really godly good rolls if you're doing dice roll for your character creation, where you roll dice to determine your stats. When monks are unarmed, they get extra damage because they're monks and they're badass and they can just punch a dragon in the face if they want to. They get tons of special abilities. They get really good saves. All their saves are completely even. They don't get nearly as many basic attacks as, say, the fighter or the barbarian, but with Flurry of Blows, they can potentially get more attacks than a fighter. They won't hit as hard as a fighter's attacks will, but he hits more of them. Maybe not quite as often, but the sheer number of attacks means you're still going to be doing damage. And that's the monk in a nutshell, is you just run around with no armor, punching things in the soul with tons of special abilities. But your drawback is you need a bit of everything to function.
For a monk, he has the inverse of the fighter's problem. If you're in a high magic campaign, the monk is crap. Because the monk relies on having no armor or weapons. So he's balanced if everyone else has like normal amounts of armor and weapons. If everyone else gets magical weapons, the monk falls very quickly in how good they're doing in the team. Especially at later levels. Later levels are dominated by some fighters and mostly spellcasters. And the monk just cannot keep up with that at later levels and the amount of magic items that are given. But starting out, early campaigns, monks are very good. If you can have the stats to build them, they are very powerful. Just don't be surprised when the game starts to continue on into like maybe level 10 or higher, and then your monk is starting to do a lot less damage than everyone else, because they now have abilities and powers.
You can use your special abilities to mitigate that to an extent, but your special abilities have a limit on how much you can use per day. So a high-level monk suffers from the same issue as what we'll get into spellcasters at the end. They have the same issue at low levels. Their limit on what they can do for magic at low levels makes them very, very quick burst useful, and then they just kind of sit around the rest of the day twiddling their thumbs, being like, I'm waiting for my magic to recharge, don't mind me. Monks come into that late game because monk abilities, they don't really need them early game. Their sheer ability to attack more times than everybody else and do tons of unarmed damage means that for the most part, they're just attacking people and punching them. And then at higher levels, they have to start using their key strikes, their quivering palms, their various special abilities that we'll get into a little later. They're relying on those more and more, but each of those can only be used once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day. There's always a limit to how many times a day they could use them. And once they're out, they just kind of sit there in the corner and let all the magic users and the decked out fighter with his fancy magical plus 20 friggin' armor just wade in there and be like, I'm the fighter. And then the monk just kind of sits there. It's like, well, I did my damage for the day. I'm going to go sip some tea. Inversely, games with as little to no magic items, especially games that have little to no magic items and little to no gold, so that no one's really upgrading their stuff. A monk will just fly past every other sort of melee class. Barbarians a little less, because as I said, barbarians do benefit in that sort of low magic, low gold setting, because at that point their rage isn't as big a drawback as it is against things that have magical weapons and armor, or that are decked out in very expensive gear. The monk, at that point, will shoot past him slightly better. And that's where the monk excels. There are ways to break a monk through multi-classing, which is something we'll probably get into in Season 2 of the podcast, where we'll be going over the Dungeon Master's Manual after we finish going through the main book. But in general, multi-classing is the ability that the game gives you to have more than one class. That can sometimes make or break certain classes that are otherwise completely boned at one point or another on their own as they stand on paper. They're a very good starting or branching class for multi-classing as a result. Any general thoughts, Red Fox, or you just want to get straight into the abilities of a monk?
I think we should. There's a lot of abilities that are really awesome.
We covered Flurry of Blows, which is extra attacks at, I believe it's a -2 penalty to each attack.
It depends. The higher level they get, the more attacks and the different the penalty becomes.
Yeah, at the beginning I believe it's -2, and then as they level up so many levels, they get better at doing these rapid fire punches and kicks and other strikes, and they get to do more of them at even less of a penalty, to the point where I believe it's almost a non-existent penalty, and they're doing somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 attacks around.
After level 3, there is no penalty to Flurry of Blows.
Oh, really? That's how easy it goes. I forgot how
Yeah.
quickly that went away. And then, of course, as I said, unarmed strike. The size of the monk determines how much extra damage it does at what levels. A small obviously does less damage than the medium. A large monk does more than a medium monk, and so on and so forth. And basically, it's every 4 levels or so, he gets an extra dice on that. So for your average medium size, you go from a 1d6 unarmed to a 1d8 to a 1d10 to a 2d6 to a 2d8. And at level 20, you have 2d10 damage you're doing base unarmed attacks. They also get some bonus feats, mostly mobility-based feats that make them more mobile because of their slightly weakened armor compared to other frontliners. Like barbarians, they're very skirmishy. They run in for the punches, and then they pull back so someone else can take the blow that comes after. They gain access to evasion, which lets them avoid magical and unusual attacks with great agility. Whenever they make a reflex saving throw against attacks that normally deal half damage, they take no damage, and I believe failures count as half damage. When they get, I believe there's an improved evasion that does that. Yep, only half damage on a failed save. So eventually, AoE attacks and traps and things like that, monks eventually can never take more than half damage off of that. And there's always the chance that they'll just make the save and just completely ignore it because they just dodge out of the way. Fast movement like a barbarian, which just lets them move that much faster than everybody else because they're used to being quick and unencumbered. They get Still Mind, which gives them +2 bonus on saving throws against spells and effects from the School of Enchantment, because their meditation and training allow them to know their own minds so well that they can just tell when something's trying to mess with their head, because they know how their head's supposed to be. It's kind of a weird way of explaining it, but basically that's how it works. Then we have Key Strike, which is another one of their abilities. Whenever they do a Key Strike, their unarmed attacks are treated as magic weapons for the purpose of dealing damage to creatures with damage reduction. And it keeps improving every so many levels. At 10th level, at 16th level, it improves. 10th level, they get an extra thing where they get treated as lawful weapons. So if you're fighting something chaotic, or something just weak against law in general, Amongst Fists is just the righteous fury of the law coming at you, like Judge Dredd himself is punching you in the face. At 16th level, they're treated as adamantine weapons for the purpose of dealing damage to creatures with damage reduction and bypassing hardness. And that basically means that her fists are so hard, she can just shatter normally unshatterable objects with her bare hands that you normally couldn't shatter except with maybe like the strongest hammers and battering rams in existence. 4th level and higher, and this ability improves as well over time. They get Slow Fall. Slow Fall lets them grab onto a nearby wall that's within distance of them, and as long as they can touch that wall, they fall as if it was 20 feet shorter, and then the distance increases over time repeatedly, up to 90 feet eventually is how they can ignore it. At 5th level, they get Purity of Body, which they get such control over their own body and its immune system. They're immune to all diseases except for supernatural magical diseases, which is fairly useful to have when you start running into assassins and things like that if your campaign tends to focus on things like that. You're amongst the person who basically tests the food and they'll know if they're trying to be poisoned usually, and their body will just ignore it.
No, it's not. Because
Most
monks are immune to disease, not poison.
Yes,
Well,
they
they
There's
are.
a big
Yes, they are.
problem with
They are immune to
Yes,
poison.
they are. It's a level 3 ability.
that. Yeah? Oh, you're right. Okay.
They also get Wholeness of Body, which is they can heal their own wounds. They can heal a number of hit points of damage equal to twice their current monk level each day, and they can spread that healing out over several uses, which makes them really good at just naturally recuperating health. Useful in low magic settings where there's not many magical healing sources. The improved evasion feat, we talked about that earlier. That's when they only take the 1/2 damage on failed saves for reflex. At 11th level, they get Diamond Body, which is the immunity to poisons of all kind. Abundant Step is 12th level. They can slip magically between spaces as though using Dimension Door once per day, which is incredibly useful. Although there are downsides to using Dimension Door. It is very risky. So help you if you can't see where you're trying to go.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't see your target destination, you try to use Dimension Door, there's a very good chance half of you is going to be inside a wall.
I've had players stupid to use Dimension Door and killed their partners doing this.
I was there for it. I can attest to this very much as a first-hand witness. It was horrible. Much death
It was
and moaning.
hilarious.
It's
Oh,
the Nightcrawler problem.
was.
Don't
Yes,
don't
it's the
teleport
Nightcrawler
without
problem.
knowing.
It's the Nightcrawler problem, exactly. They get Diamond Soul after that, which gives them a spell resistance equal to their current monk level +10. In order to affect the monk with a spell, the spellcaster must get a result on a caster level check that equals or exceeds that monk's spell resistance. Between monks, pretty much, if a lower level wizard comes up to a monk, they're going to have a hard time hitting that monk with magic. That monk's just going to be like, I don't care for your magic, sir. I'm going to punch you in the face now. Quivering Palm is at 15th level, which is very, very useful. They can set up vibrations within the body of another creature that can thereafter be fatal if the monk so desires. She can use this Quivering Palm attack once a week. They must announce the intent before making the attack roll. Things immune to critical hits can't be affected. Otherwise, if you hit something with this and they're susceptible to critical hits, they take damage from the blow, the palm attack succeeds, and thereafter the monk can try to slay the victim at any later time as long as the attempt is made within a number of days equal to her monk level. The monk merely wills the target to die to do this. It's a free action, and unless it makes a fortitude save of DC 10 plus half the monk's level plus its wisdom modifier, getting into why wisdom's important, it dies. It is the Fist of the North Star approach.
I was just about to say, you're already dead. Wait, what?
Exactly.
Ah!
You just punch someone with Quivering Palm, and then you're just like, okay, you're dead now. What? And just will them to explode. If the saving throw is successful, though, the target no longer is in danger from that particular Quivering Palm attack. But if they've been hit by more than one Quivering Palm, the other Quivering Palms are not affected by him saving against the first one. So sometimes it's useful to do multiple Quivering Palms first, and then start triggering them one by one. It's very hard to do that, though, since you can only do that, I believe, once a day at most.
Once a week.
Once a week. So you have to really be hounding the same guy over and over again, or have multiple monks hitting him. Timeless Body is 17th level. It's the ability to stop the ability scores for aging, and it cannot be magically aged. So it's even better than the Druid one, because the Druid one, I believe, did not specify cannot be magically aged,
Correct.
whereas the one for Monk does, because Monk has such control over their own body. They just will their body to stop aging and resist any attempt to force it to. Bonuses will still accrue, and the monk will still die of old age when their time is up. At 17th level, they can just speak with any living creature. They just have this ability to just speak to anything. It's uncanny. I love it. It seems to have absolutely no bearing on the monk's playstyle, on the monk's function, on the monk's fluff. But for some reason, they decided they get Tongue of the Sun and Moon at level 17, and they can just speak with any living creature. I guess they have such great tongue control, they can just fake any language. I don't know. I don't know how they understand it, but I guess they just force their ears to understand things.
They're in tune with the whole way of things. So
I suppose that's another way of looking at it. It's still kind of bullshit, but it's incredibly useful despite its bullshitness. They get Empty Body at 19th level, which is the ability to assume an ethereal state for 1 round per monk level per day, as though using the spell Etherealness. You can go ethereal on a number of different occasions during any single day, as long as the total number of rounds spent does not exceed her monk level. Which is useful. It's very hard to hit something ethereal, and I think it's also very difficult to see ethereal things, if I recall correctly, because of their sort of fuzzy, almost ghostly appearance. They're very hard to notice.
ethereals, it's a 50% chance to miss every time you attack.
Yeah, it's a 50% chance to miss because you're essentially out of phase slightly with the normal plane of the mortal realm. So you're still technically somewhat there, but you're also somewhat not there. So it's a 50-50 shot that when they actually swing at you, they're going to hit you and not just have it pass through an ethereal you. And then the last thing they get is Perfect Self at 20th level, which is they're forevermore treated as an outsider rather than as a humanoid for the purpose of spells and magical effects. For example, Charm Person does not affect them. Additionally, the monk gains damage reduction 10 magic, which allows them to ignore/instantly regenerate the first 10 points of damage from any attack made by a non-magical weapon or by any natural attack made by a creature that doesn't have similar damage reduction. Unlike other outsiders, the monk can still be brought back from the dead as if she were a member for the previous creature type. That is important. That is incredibly important. If you are given the option of becoming an outsider, make damn sure to know ahead of time, are you a native outsider? Which is what that technically is. A native outsider can be brought back from the dead. A non-native outsider cannot be resurrected from the dead by any means whatsoever. So bear that in mind. If any DM offers you something that makes you an outsider, make sure that there's a clarification there.
If I remember correctly, due to the way the monk is worded, technically they're a true outsider who just gets the bonus of being able to resurrect.
Yeah, they
so
are
they
a
can
true outsider.
They can still be banished and stuff. So.
Yeah, they can still be banished and all else, but they can be brought back from the dead as well. So they get the best of both worlds, but most templates that give you outsider, you don't have that benefit. You're either a native or a non-native outsider. Anyone else have any thoughts on Monk before we close and go to Paladin?
Yes. Most monks are human or live among human. Many non-human creatures like half-orcs and half-elves who live among humans end up being monks. Elves sometimes can be monks due to their long-term devotion to an interest. Monk tradition is pretty alien among the dwarf and gnome cultures, and halflings, they move around too much to really have a monastery life. So dwarf, gnome, and halfling monks are extremely rare. Monks
Has nothing to do with it.
sometimes distance themselves between other classes because they don't have too much in common in terms of devotion or skills. Monks do, however, work well with the support of others and usually prove themselves quite useful as companions. They just tend to keep them to themselves in these parties.
That's pretty much the norm. You're more than welcome to have your monk work differently. Really, as long as your monk doesn't break whatever code you set for your monk can technically be whatever you want, but you have to make sure that there is some form of code set that the DM is aware of, so that the DM can judge whether or not you're being against alignment whenever you do an action. They have to know what guideline are you judging your character's code. Are you the typical sort of monk who kind of sits alone, a very Spartan way of living? Or are you a monk who believes it's okay to live it up a little bit here and there as long as you have some sort of a balance, or as long as your focus is always on perfecting yourself or perfecting your art? There's all sorts of various ways you can interpret a monk's code, but there has to be a code.
Yeah, if you break your code or become non-lawful, you cannot gain levels as a monk anymore, but you actually do keep all of your abilities up to that point. You don't lose it like you do in the other classes, which is nice.
And also why monks make great multiclassers. Because a monk who multiclasses and then becomes anything besides a monk, they won't gain any more monk abilities, but you know what? That's fine. You probably weren't playing to anyway, and you keep everything you've learned as a monk thus far. And some of those monk abilities, and I don't believe their abilities are affected by armor, only their flurry of blows and their bonus to armor class is affected by whether or not they have armor. I would like to
And their
double check
movement.
that. And their movement, yeah. Everything
If
else.
you actually try to multi-class a monk, you can never gain another monk level ever again.
Right. But you only lose the mobility things, like your ability to attack very quickly, your ability to move quickly, your ability to dodge easily. You still retain the ability, even in heavy armor, to do your key strikes, to do your quivering palms. You still retain the purity that your body has attained to the point where you chose to no longer be a monk. That remains, and that can be useful and fun to mess with when paired with other classes when multiclassing. Not always the best way to go. It's very hard to pick a good class to multiclass out of from a monk. But if you find one that you think works, go ahead and try it out. I would recommend doing it in your head on paper first. Always go on paper first before you multiclass in-game. Because what seems like a good idea in your head, once you put it down on paper and you start looking at the hard facts and what it can and can't do, you start going like, oh, wait a minute, this wasn't nearly as awesome as I thought it was. That's just my little disclaimer there on multiclassing. Always test the math out before you just go ahead and make your character something. And I believe that's it on Monk. So without further ado, Fluxin, you've been wanting to say this for a while. Unleash the beast on Paladin.
Okay, so for all the classes before, we've gone through what the class is. We're going to make a huge U-turn here for Paladin. We're going to right now talk about what Wizards thought the Paladin was and what they thought they put down on paper and what it should have been. Okay. In their mind, Paladin is the tank. It's the healer who does damage. They're a cleric mixed with a fighter who can stand up and fight back. They're the holy champion of their god. Okay? Sounds fun. And before I go into why it's not fun, I'm going to see if anyone else has any other things to say about a paladin.
Only that you're very correct in that Paladin suffers far greatly from what the Barbarian suffered from and what we went over at the beginning of the last one. Wizards had an idea in their head, and what ended up on paper was a horrible bastardization of this idea that fails in every fundamental sense of the term. Where a Barbarian, you can salvage some of the original concept with a bit of tweaking and be a viable class if you're willing to put the effort into making a Barbarian good. There is very little redeeming qualities to the Paladin as it exists on paper.
I really have a dislike for paladins in general.
Yeah, and not only on paper, just the very ideas of how they worded what a Paladin must and must not be fluff-wise also shoots a Paladin in the foot as something you want to have in the party, and I'm sure Flux has plenty to say on that as well. So Flux, once again, unleash the beast.
Okay, so again, I'm completely rewriting the rules on how we're doing the classes for Paladins. Before, we would talk about the class, what they do, and then get into their special abilities. Let me talk about the Paladin special abilities first, and maybe a good listener can pick up the problem here. Okay, first level, a Paladin gets Aura of Good. They radiate an aura of goodness. So anyone who can detect auras or can detect good will automatically know a Paladin is good. That's just kind of a bonus thing to get. Same thing clerics get. Paladins gain Detect Evil. They are allowed at will to see if something's evil. So if something has an evil aura, a Paladin will automatically know. Okay? And they gain Smite Evil once per day, which means once per day, a Paladin can attack a monster, and if that monster happens to be evil, then the Paladin gets a Charisma-based bonus to its hit, and then a Paladin level-based bonus to the damage, once a day, if the Paladin doesn't miss, with their horrible hit bonus. Okay? Now, second level, Paladin gains Divine Grace. This is one of the few things that Paladins actually get really nice. A Paladin's Charisma bonus is automatically added to all their saves. Paladin has a Charisma of 18, they automatically gain +4 to every single save, just because of having Divine Grace. And also at second level, Paladin gains Lay on Hands, where depending on a Paladin's Charisma, they can start healing their teammates, a set amount of heal points a day that they can split up. As you notice, starting to slow down on the abilities the Paladin gets each level. Third level, Paladin gains Aura of Courage. The Paladin is immune to fear, magical or otherwise, and every ally by the Paladin gains a morale bonus against fear. Okay, that makes sense. The Paladin is essentially the paragon of the group. People seeing the Paladin makes them less likely to break apart or run scared. That works. Paladins also get Divine Health, so they're immune to all diseases, including supernatural magical, unlike the monk, who only controls metabolism of themselves. Paladin is helped by their god to not get diseases, which works. Fourth level, Paladin gains Turn Undead. Same thing as a cleric. They can get rid of undead, even though they probably should fight it. And now we get into the problem. Up to 4th level, Paladins are cool. They're great, okay? We get into 5th level. What does Paladin get? Paladin gets Smite Evil, second time for a day, and a special mount. Paladin gets a horse, a dog if you're a small creature, and something that you can ride that is given to you by your god that can fight alongside with you, okay? Now we get to 6th level. Paladin gets Remove Disease once a week. They can cure a disease. We get to 7th level. Nothing. 8th. Nothing. 9th. You get another use of Remove Disease. 10th. Get another use of Smite Evil. 11th. Nothing. 12th. Remove Disease. 13th. Nothing. 14th. Nothing. 15th. Nothing. 16th. Nothing. 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 After 5th level, the Paladin becomes a non-entity. They immediately jump from being a fighter to a spellcaster without any of the cool spellcaster abilities. They don't get any of the cool cleric abilities. They essentially become an off cleric with mediocre fighter abilities. And the fact is, Paladins, by their nature, are so restricted in the game.
If
Paladins
I might
have to be...
interject while we're on the concept of spellcasting, if you look at their spells per day table, they only get 1st through 4th level spells, and for the first 2 levels that they get access to a new type of spell, they get 0 spells per day, meaning they only get bonus spells from their ability score that correlates to their spellcasting. At max level, level 20, with no consideration for bonus spells, they can cast 3 spells per day of 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th level. Their spells per day chart is the single most horrid thing this game has to offer, even for an off spellcaster. Rangers get faster spell progression than they do. And Rangers have almost no need for spellcasting, whereas the Paladin, the way they're built, kind of relies on it at later levels. But they can't do it! Well, I'm looking here. There's a stretch from 5th level to 13th level. They have 1 1st level spell per day. They don't get a second one until 14th level. They don't get their third one till 18th level. That's level 1 spells. That is your most basic spells that you as a Paladin are capable of casting, and you can only cast 1 per day until you hit 14th level. Why? Why? What person in their design staff looked at that progression table and said, yep, that's good? Clearly, they did not look at the progression tables for Ranger that we'll get into later, because Ranger is an off druid, and Ranger gets a nice, decent spell progression. No one shared
And
this information, apparently, with the guy making the off cleric.
now you think maybe, okay, paladins have kind of crappy in fighting. Maybe they're good in role-playing. That is the one saving grace of a paladin, depending on how you like to roleplay.
Mm-hmm.
Paladin must always, for 3.5, be lawful good. Paladin cannot lie. Paladin cannot cheat. Paladin cannot use stealth. Paladin cannot use poison. If a paladin does one of those things once, every single one of your paladin abilities is gone until you atone to your god because you pissed them off so much for trying to do something. So, yeah, your paladin gets to roleplay. You have severe restrictions placed on your roleplaying, and what do you get in return for the severe restrictions? Let's think. You don't get very good fighting abilities. You get really crappy kind of like a cleric who's sick of spells. You get nothing for the amount of restrictions that are placed on a paladin. The only thing good you get is that at max level for a paladin, there are maybe 5 very interesting paladin spells that clerics don't get.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all a paladin gets.
Even on
And-
the roleplay bit, basically what all that roleplay things means for people who couldn't quite follow what Flux meant, to put it in an analogy, you're basically forced to play a very direct and unoriginal Vulcan.
Worst part is that most people play paladins fucking stupid. Lawful stupid seems to be the norm with paladins, and which is why I hate them.
It takes a strong role player to play a paladin well, and if you're a strong role player, paladin's fun, as Flux said. But if you're a shitty role player, don't do paladin for the love of God. You're gonna hate
Please
everything
don't.
about your class, and you're going to fuck up your entire party with the way you're forced to play.
If you don't enjoy role-playing, there is no point whatsoever to play a paladin.
No point.
If you don't enjoy role-playing, just create a cleric and multi-class into a fighter. There, you've got a better paladin than the paladin will ever be. Very easily. Speaking of multi-classing, paladin has the same problem that a monk has. Once you leave your paladin class, you can never, ever jump back into being a paladin. And I don't know why wizards thought, okay, monk has the same ability. But you know what monk gets? Monks get prestige classes. Monk gets this prestige classes that are essentially an evolved and more powerful monk. Who at Wizards thought this was a good idea? Paladin has maybe in all the splat books 10 prestige classes that are made for them out of everything. Paladin has no prestige classes built to them because they can't multiclass. Why would a paladin jump out of being a paladin? Because they get nothing after 5th level. Nada.
On the note of multiclassing, of those available multiclassing, there's only one true prestige class for a paladin, and it is the only reason to ever bring a paladin to level 20, and that's to immediately turn around, turn evil, and become a blackguard.
Paladin gets better from being evil and become a blackguard.
Because the way the blackguard works, and we'll get into this more in depth when we get to blackguards in the Dungeon Master's Manual after we've covered Player's Handbook, the basic fundamental idea behind a blackguard is that most blackguards are fallen paladins, and as a result, they have the ability to instantly buy blackguard levels with a bonus to each ability that they've bought by buying levels, up to level 10, the max level of a blackguard. Meaning a level 20 paladin can give up those 10 levels that they do not need as a paladin that gives them absolutely nothing to immediately buy 10 levels in a blackguard, gain all blackguard abilities, add a bonus, and still retain all unique abilities of a paladin, only now corrupted and evil.
Mm-hmm.
That is the one true path every paladin must take. They must endure to level 20, become fed up with this shit, and fall from grace and realize that evil is the only true path for a paladin. It's like they built Paladin to be the tragic hero who falls from grace, frustrated with his own limitations. It's like they tailor-built the entire class to force everyone to do that.
And now, maybe could give Paladin some leeway if everyone else had problems with creating a Paladin. But then you look at Pathfinder, or even Wizards' own Splash books.
Or
And
even
they've
4th
all-
edition.
Well, no, 4th edition, they learned over time. That would
Yeah.
work. Pathfinder came out around, if I'm correct, a few years after 3.5?
No.
Oh, no?
It was a long time after 3.5.
Okay.
It
Well,
was actually right after
Before
fourth came out.
Yeah.
okay. Well, then, even losing that, Wizards own Splat books. I can at least name 2 other classes that are essentially just Wizards saying, "Oh shit, we fucked up the Paladin. Let's do them again. Oh shit, we fucked up this one. Let's do it for a 3rd time." I'll give the names right now. Crusader and Knight. If you ever want to play a paladin, just play one of those classes and roleplay it as if it was a paladin. The paladin has nothing that is very unique to itself that makes you have to play a paladin to get the same role-playing abilities out of it.
In fact, I can name one other. You could just play a very just knightly fighter and call it a
Mhm.
paladin.
Yeah.
You won't have the divine power that a paladin has and the other classes have, but you'll have the general concept. You're a staunch defender of all that is good. You could just make a fighter who does that.
There's very little to justify being a paladin other than those role-playing elements, and you can easily just copy and paste those role-playing elements onto any other character you want to play
Actually,
as.
Flux, there's a fourth one. You could just play a very, very frontline heavy cleric.
Mm-hmm. If you notice, back when we were talking about clerics get heavy armor.
Yeah.
So what's the point of a paladin? If a cleric is an off fighter already with heavy armor and running around with maces and spells, why do you need a paladin? Because it was in like 1st and 2nd edition, so we might as well adapt it to 3rd edition. And shit, we fucked up. Let's keep it in there and hope no one notices.
Honestly, this is one of the few cases where 4th edition got it right.
Oh, yeah.
Because they
Fourth-
actually fixed Paladin to be playable.
They fixed every fundamental thing wrong with Paladin, and not only did they fix it, I actually really want to someday play in a 4E game where I am not the one stuck calling dibs on Paladin 2nd and just sitting there going, drat, missed it again. Because 4th edition Paladin not only looks fun to play, but based on the math and everything I've seen on how the class functions mechanically, it is exactly what a Paladin should have been in 3.5. If you, for whatever reason, after hearing all this, decide you must still play the Paladin class for whatever weird, masochistic reason that you want to put yourself through this, heavy armor, shield, longsword. Just build the most stereotype thinking Paladin you can, because there is very little reason to deviate from that with the way Paladin's built. Longsword has a high enough bonus when you're proficient with it that it's going to hit more often than pretty much any other weapon you could possibly carry. Your shield's going to give you extra armor to offset the fact that you suck at doing anything but taking hits. And heavy armor will, again, help you take those hits by letting you just block the hits. It's the only real function of a Paladin. Unless, and I will let Fluxton do that because I think that we should end here. We're getting close to the end of the show. Fluxton, grapple horse.
Oh god,
Oh, you mean the saving grace of the paladin?
no.
If you okay, so paladins get special mounts. The mount is usually a horse. It can be other things, but most often it's a horse. Okay? And one of the few things that I said before, paladins get some special abilities. The paladin's special spells mostly all relate to making their mount better. Paladins can give their mount wings. They can make them more than one mount. They can just make the mount great at charging. Okay? Now, paladins get an ability that allows them to create more than one mount. And horses have the ability of plus 11 to grapple. It's put there because it's very hard to grapple a horse.
Horse is a big, heavy thing.
It's meant to be reactionary, but Wizards put no stipulation that it can't be actionary.
This is going to be the first and main things. We are planning on doing an episode on how to just break things in this game. This is going to be the most fundamental issue that Wizards has that makes breaking it easy. Wizards in 3.5 did not often enough say what needed to be said, and what needed to be said was, you cannot use it this way. Wizards did not know how to use the word cannot. They just couldn't use it often enough. Everything was just like, this is how it is. Well, about this stupid situation where it couldn't possibly physically make any sense? Well, we're not saying you can't, so it means I can. As long as the DM says, okay.
To be fair, the creator of Dungeons & Dragons, Gary Gygax,
Was batshit insane.
actually has been quoted as saying, yes, you can literally hide up someone's ass. You gotta roll a hide check of 32.
This is true. He did put a number on hiding up someone's butt. So make that your goal, ladies and gentlemen. If you have a rogue or any other stealthy class and you want to literally hide up someone's ass, make a roll of 32. Make a note of that. DMs, write that somewhere for every one of your campaigns when it comes up, because it will come up thanks to us. If someone wants to make that check, it's a DC 32.
So if you ever feel the need to go through Paladin,
Yes.
always imagine the light at the tunnel is that at the end, your Paladin evolves from becoming a Paladin to a horse summoner. who summons hundreds of horses who grab an opponent's arms behind their back and let the other horses beat that opponent up.
Or, as you also discovered, you can make your horses fly and then carry their prey into the sky in
Yes.
mass and drop them upon the rocks like angry birds of prey trying to open up clams.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And the best thing is, Paladin doesn't lose anything from multiclassing, and I will bring up one thing. Paladins can share their spells with their horses.
Mm-hmm.
So, you might think of another class that can share spells with something. The Druid. The Druid gets spells to augment how they look. Druids can summon like Triceratops horns, or the ability to spider walk. You know what all those have a cast range of? You. You know what cast range of you adds to? The horse. You can have wall climbing Tricera horses who can attack people.
I forgot about that.
Winged spider climbing Tricera horses. So not only can they climb the walls, they can descend upon you like bats from hell with Triceratops horns. Because nothing in the rule says you can't. Except your DM. If your DM says no, you must respect that. Your DM's word is the final word, even when the book normally says otherwise. And as Dungeon Masters, I implore you, if someone comes up to you with a stupid idea that you're not comfortable allowing for its sheer stupidity, just say no.
Motorcycles.
No motorcycles, fuck. You cannot have motorcycle puppets.
Paladins are mostly human. Half-elves sometimes can be paladins, but not always. Dwarves sometimes are paladins, but becoming a paladin may be hard because dwarves think it's putting their duties of paladin before duties of family, which we'll get into.
No for dwarves.
Yeah, we'll get into the races another time and why that's such a big deal. Others are rarely ever paladins because they just don't give a fuck. Paladins with other people in your party, they eagerly team up with those who kind of mesh with their own skill sets. They work well with good and lawful clerics, and they appreciate anyone who's working brave, honest, and committed to the furtherance of good. They don't get along well with the fringe classes like rogues.
Yeah.
They really don't like rogues one bit. Even if they're chaotic good rogues, they still have a distrust of the rogue.
And that's where the lawful stupid dangerous.
Yeah, it's where the lawful stupid comes into play a lot of the time.
Too many paladin players choose to take that as just canon and cannot be altered, and that they must constantly go mistrusting and almost outright sabotaging the party's rogue whenever he does anything slightly questionable or in a morally gray or legally gray area.
Yeah.
And for the rogue player, that gets annoying fast, and it makes you very quickly start considering what exactly is the sleep cycle of my paladin. When is he in his deepest sleep so I can sneak up on him easiest and slip a dagger between his shoulder blades?
I don't care if it turns my line medieval, Paladin's got to go.
I have a backup character waiting who'll be glad to step into this party and will praise this rogue on his way out into the prison.
That's all I got to say about it.
We said the whole race thing about paladins, how there's not many dwarf paladins or elf paladins. But don't let that discourage you. People love an underdog story, and a half-orc paladin can be amazing.
Oh, half-orc paladin.
The idea of a half-orc paladin can be an amazing thing to roleplay.
I've done half-orc spellcasters just because it's so unexpected. Or half-orc bards. I've had one once. And he was the best half-orc bard ever.
And as we stated, don't go into a paladin for gameplay. Go into it for role-playing.
Oh, yeah.
So even that, though a half-orc gets some very bad penalties to intelligence that a paladin kind of would like, fuck it, you're going to be horrible even if you do have the best stats. Go in it for role-playing.
In fact, being a half-orc makes the paladin able to hit things.
Mm-hmm.
So let that be our closing sentiment. Half-orc paladins allow a paladin to hit things. So thank you for listening from myself, Fluxen, and Red Fox. This has been episode 3. I apologize. Doing a lot of recording in a short amount of time recently. If you want to check us out on our own live stuff, you can check Red Fox out at twitch.tv/redfox_nightfox. Fluxen at twitch.tv/Fluxen.
Grumble.
Well, yeah, I know. We all have our grumbles right now about Twitch. And myself at twitch.tv/SovekOnivris. And also, if you want to support the podcast, and so we keep doing more seasons after the first 1 or 2, or just want to show us that you enjoy, you're welcome to donate at my Patreon, patreon.com/SovekOnivris. And I hope you all enjoyed. Goodbye. God bless. Good night. And
Don't let the paladins
America is
bite.
America. Yeah, don't let the paladins bite. That's better than America, America.
They'll probably miss, but they can bite.
They'll miss, but they'll bite angrily as they miss. Good night, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, whatever the hell it is where you are right now.